This video was intended to be much longer, almost 10 hours long in fact. Due to unforeseen complications though, I'm instead going to upload it in a series of smaller parts. If you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend you start there before continuing. Link in the description. We get properly introduced to Lancer in episode 4, and the characterization present is substantial to say the least. With all the other masters having claimed their territories and lying in wait, Lancer and his master make the first move and decide to put themselves out in the open, where all the others can see. Saber and her team are the first to respond to this challenge directly, though they're not the only ones who take note of it. In the very next line, we learn that Lancer has a charm spell that he was born with that affects women. Despite being a girl herself, however, Saber reveals her resistance to magic and by extension Lancer's charm spell. Lancer's reaction isn't of disappointment, but rather relief. He's pleased that he isn't forced to kill someone that's infatuated with him. He might be a warrior, but he prefers to fight battles fairly. As the fight continues, both combatants exchange inner monologues that recognize the other as a master of their respective weapon. Soon after, Lancer manages to land a strike against Saber, using a spear that can bypass her magical armor. In response, she removes the armor to give herself more mobility. Now, from the surface, all this makes sense, but when observed more closely, Saber choosing to remove her armor is a rather serious contrivance. First of all, because there's little reason to support the decision. True, she gains some advantage to it, most of which are inferred. It doesn't take much imagination to guess that her armor is heavy and could weigh her down, so removing it would make her more mobile. Except there are many examples after this episode where she is shown to be quite mobile and even acrobatic despite wearing her armor, making it more difficult to justify the decision, but that on its own could be fine if it wasn't for what happens next. Despite being on opposite sides, both show respect for the other as a knight. These two masters of the blade have a sense of honor towards other skilled fighters like themselves, and there's reason to support their mutual respect. Both are prominent knights from Celtic mythology, so it's likely that they'd have very similar codes of honor they uphold, and this mutual code they share will become the centerpiece for their relationship and the mutual respect they have for each other. This is the first of several attributes of his character that will become prominent later in the series. The second is shown soon after, when Lancer reveals his second noble phantasm, a spear that can create unhealing wounds, and manages to land a significant blow to Saber's left arm, leaving it completely inoperable until Lancer can be defeated. This is what makes Saber's choice contrived, because the loss of her arm becomes a key plot point at an incredibly pivotal moment. Even during her rematch, she still chooses to keep the armor when Lancer's spear can still pass through it. Immediately after, Ryder reveals himself before Lancer finishes Saber. He offers them both a chance to share the Grail and its spoils if they swear loyalty to him. Lancer turns down the offer, declaring that he would never serve anyone other than his master. Ryder proceeds to call his master a coward for hiding in the shadows, and we cut to this interesting shot here. A visual trope used in many anime to display restrained emotion, though his anger is still obvious. This tells us that he's very composed and doesn't let his actions be driven by fury, but more importantly this tells us that he's very defensive of his master. The very suggestion that his master's actions are cowardly is what drove him to anger. Given this and his reaction to Ryder's offer, he seems to value loyalty to his master, but there's more to learn from the context of the fight. Kenneth's feelings towards his servant are the opposite to Lancer's towards him. He doesn't have very much respect for a servant to speak of. Much of this could be a result of a setback with a student of his. Originally he intended to summon Alexander the Great, but due to other events he had to make do with Diarmuid Udabane, a weaker servant than his first choice, and arguably the weakest servant out of the 7, though there is still more reason he has to hate Lancer, but more on that later. These pieces of information remain consistent with Lancer's behavior regarding his second most important character trait. He values his loyalty to his master above everything else. He's angered when his name is insulted, and he would even rather forfeit the Grail than swear loyalty to anyone else. This is all despite the fact that his master doesn't reciprocate the same respect, which only reinforces how strongly he values his loyalty if he willingly swears to someone like Kenneth. After calling Lancer's master cowardly, Ryder challenges all of the other servants watching the duel. This gives rise to 2 more servants joining the fight, one of them being Berserker. When given the chance, Berserker lunges at Saber, and Lancer rushes to her aid. Because of the respect he's gained for Saber, he values the fight he started with her, and wouldn't leave it unfinished if he can help it. He'd also rather not fight an unfair duel with someone if he didn't think they deserved it. Not all dissimilar to his reaction to when his charm spell had no effect on Saber. These create Lancer's code of chivalry that will become very prominent in the story yet to come. Every decision he's made is consistent with his character throughout the anime, and it establishes his most prominent attributes while putting them at the forefront of the conflict presented. Kenneth, however, orders Lancer to take advantage of the opportunity to remove Saber from the fight. Lancer pleads to him, hoping to appeal to his better nature. He doesn't want to go against his code, but he doesn't take pride in refusing an order from his master either. Despite his pleading, Kenneth uses a command seal to compel Lancer to fight. Just before he and Berserker can finish off Saber, Ryder steps in and demands that Lancer's master withdraw. Once again, Lancer expresses relief that he didn't have to betray his code, and thanks Ryder for intervening. Lancer and Saber exchange another glance at one another before parting ways. In order for Saber to continue to fight effectively, she'll need to regain her left arm. Lancer has now become a priority target to Saber and her master. They both know that their fight isn't over yet. Lancer's introduction is easily my favorite in the anime. Almost everything that we need to know about him from here onward is displayed in full. It displays all of his prominent character traits, sets up the tension he has with his master, and shows the relationship he'll share with Saber throughout the anime. And the source of that respect is also interesting. What Lancer, Saber, and even Ryder understand is that all of them want just as much of a chance at the Grail as anyone else. What they enjoy isn't the battle, but that they're given a fair chance to win it. Lancer wants Saber to have a fair chance because that's what he would want in turn, while only taking exception to those who obviously don't feel the same. He might feel a little differently about Berserker's attack on Saber if he hadn't already crippled her. Because even though he intends to win, he doesn't want others to fail as though fate was stacked against them. Almost as though he has experience with that. I am jumping a bit ahead, but you can see how much of his character we can interpret just from what's shown in these two episodes. Now where will it go from here? After Lancer and Kenneth's withdrawal, the two reconvene at the hotel they use as their base of operations. Kenneth further scolds Lancer for not finishing Saber when he had the opportunity, and for forcing him to waste a command seal in the process. Kenneth disregards Lancer's attempts to reassure him, but then Kenneth's fiancée Solau enters the room. Solau actually scolds Kenneth as though he were the one who failed, not Lancer. She points out that due to Saber's wound, they can take her out anytime they need. She also draws attention to Kenneth's lack of initiative in the battle by not seeking out Saber's master. She continues to imply his cowardice and even directly calls him pathetic. But Lancer interjects, again taking offense to the insults directed to his master. She immediately apologizes, and her composure seems to change from insulting to regretful, as though instantly. The camera focuses in on Lancer's mole, which was also focused on when his charm spell was brought up, implying that Solau is under its effect, which contextualizes her motivations, but it also further motivates Kenneth to despise his servant. But the degree to which Solau is charmed seems to be much greater than what is initially known on the surface. During her reproach, Solau brings attention to an interesting piece of information. Their master-servant relationship is shared between the three of them. Kenneth holds command seals, but Solau supplies Lancer with additional mana. Presumably, the advantage of this is if Kenneth were removed in any way, then Solau could continue acting as Lancer's master. The information is delivered rather unnaturally, but its significance tells us a lot about how charmed she is by Lancer. While she's calling Kenneth cowardly for not joining in the fight against Saber's master directly, she brings up this information as though to imply Kenneth had no reason to fear direct conflict since it meant that they could still compete, even if he were eliminated. Solau also softens him up, calling his strategy brilliant, further pushing the idea of a direct confrontation, which he will eventually do the next day. But in the process, she's basically told Kenneth that he shouldn't have been afraid to die, almost as though she's hoping something would have happened to him, since that would mean that command over Lancer would be transferred to her. These lines of dialogue are very well written because the little details not only tell us a lot about the situation of these characters, but they also reflect how much thought went into writing them. Solau's desire for Kenneth to die is apparent enough to see, but subtle enough so as not to give Kenneth that impression, nor any regular viewer for that matter, as it's drowned out by the compliments of his brilliance in tactics. And it even recontextualizes events yet to happen. Now the audience is aware of some more potential conflict that could stir up between Kenneth and Lancer, since all of this is caused because Solau is seduced by Lancer. Immediately afterwards, Saber's master makes an attempt on Kenneth's life by blowing up the building they're in. They manage to survive with Kenneth's quick thinking, and sometime later the bounty is placed on Castor, who then makes an attack on Saber in her home not long afterwards. And much like the previous fight, the commotion is too great to go unnoticed by other masters, and Kenneth and Lancer take advantage of the opportunity. Not only for Lancer to defeat Castor, but also for Kenneth to fight the man who tried to have him killed. When Lancer arrives, Saber and Castor's fight is already underway. Lancer jumps to her defense, much like he did with Berserker. He insists that he must be the one to defeat Saber, since he was the one who crippled her. More than that, he wants to take advantage of the opportunity to take down Castor before anyone else can, and utilizes Saber's help to do that. And luckily, because of the nature of Castor's noble phantasm, this isn't a betrayal of his character, having teamed up with Saber to both take down a swarm of opponents, unlike the events with Berserker. Though one criticism I have, and a rather substantial one, is why Lancer aimed for Castor's book instead of Castor himself, and through this plot armor Castor is able to escape. Though considering that this is only the second notable problem with Lancer's story, it hardly outweighs the good we've gotten. But it is still a problem. Moving on, this would be the perfect opportunity for them to finish their duel, but Lancer senses his master is in danger after having lost his fight with Saber's master. Saber allows him to rescue Kaneth, promising once again that they'd finish their fight honorably. Lancer arrives just in time, and is presented with a choice.
俺のマスターは殺させない。セイバーのマスターも殺さない。今この場で貴様が生きながらえるのは、騎士王の高潔さゆえであったことを。
Despite how easy it'd be for him to kill Saber's master there and then, he wanted to fight Saber in a fair and honorable duel. Victory does not outweigh his code, even if it were offered to him. The show continues to remind us the values that these two characters place in their honor. It's practically Lancer's defining characteristic. But the decisions that he makes here will have lasting effects on the thematic narrative of both Lancer and Saber's arcs. The next time we see Kaneth, he's in a coma, hallucinating some of Lancer's memories of his past life. It's implied that these images can come to a master at certain times as a result of their connection with their servant, and luckily it doesn't hurt the story too much that it isn't addressed or explained in detail. We see the events of Lancer's life leading up to his death. He was once a well-respected knight of Fianna who had accidentally charmed the wife of his lord. He was labeled a traitor for this, and later executed for his crimes he had no control over. Like the other servants, he has a wish, but not one that could be granted by the Grail, because when he was summoned into the war, his wish was already granted. Lancer wanted only to pledge his loyalty to a lord, and serve as the knight that he was unable to in life. He didn't care who his master was, even if they viewed him only as a tool, so long as he could serve as he had always wanted. This recontextualizes everything we know about him. He is greatly defensive of the very master that scolds him needlessly because he doesn't care. He was viewed as traitorous in life, so loyalty is what he treasures most. And this is likely why he values his honor as a knight so much as well. His actions, though mostly out of his control, likely led to him being viewed as though he had betrayed the code he stood for, so upholding it as much as he could would be in his best interest. Kaneth wakes up tied down to an operating table. Salau informs him that the damage of the fight has completely destroyed his magic circuits, and he will never use magic again. With that in mind, she suggests the command seals be transferred to her. He refuses, but Salau continues to take advantage of Kaneth's crippled state. Still deep under the spell of Lancer's charm, she threatens to amputate his arm if he doesn't surrender command. Unable to fight back, he gives in. Everything has gone exactly as Salau has wanted. Lancer's control is now in her hands. When we see her next, she reveals to Lancer that Kaneth had given up the command seals and his status as a master to her. Despite this news, Lancer rejects her authority. As a knight, he can only serve the lord he's sworn to. He'd rather give up his quest for the Grail than serve anyone other than Kaneth, though the framing of the scene hints that he's become aware of his charming influence on her. Before he can walk away, Salau says that they need the Holy Grail in order to heal Kaneth and restore his magic circuits. She appeals to his loyalty as a knight, saying that he has to win the Grail to heal his master. Lancer demands that Salau swear that she only desires the Grail for her husband and has no ulterior motive, to which she promises. This is obviously a lie, and Lancer isn't shown to be convinced, but he has no choice. Doing nothing would betray his code as a knight. Immediately after, we enter another issue with Lancer's story, and one that is endemic in both Fate Zero and Bladeworks. Excessive expository monologues. You'll notice I've been going through Lancer's scenes much more closely than previous chapters, because I want to express just how redundant his own monologue in this scene really is. His inner monologue, while endearing, tells us nothing new. Everything here can be inferred with only his actions in episode 4 and 5 and the flashback of his past. If you don't believe me, rewatch Lancer's section up to now, and tell me what his monologue covers that I haven't. It is superfluous, and unfortunately both shows have a bad habit of exhibiting monologues where they are unneeded or unnecessary, usually expositing information about characters that either are or can be seen for ourselves. One could argue that this is a result of adapting from mediums, such as light novels or visual novels, which rely more on crafting a narrative through verbal rather than visual means. Some of these monologues may be unnecessary, but they are simply adapted directly from the source material so as to be as faithful to it as possible. but I don't see this as an excuse. While true that a level of faithfulness to a source when adapting something is to be desired, I would argue that when adapting from different mediums, there is such a thing as being too faithful to the source, especially in anime. Take Soul Eater, for instance, an example that is rife with this issue, though it's the least of its problems. In chapter 31 of the manga, Death the Kid is fighting an enemy called the Fisher King on a train. There's also a mouse here for some reason. I don't know, I haven't watched Soul Eater in forever. At one point, the train is decoupled, with Kid being left on the car behind. Fisher is attacked, and so he jumps to avoid it, but unintentionally jumps to the car being left behind. He then verbally points out what just happened. All of this happens in only a few panels within the same page, especially when talking about manga, an art style that is usually black and white and can sometimes appear sketch-like. It can be difficult to discern what occurred when so many things are happening in so few panels. Stating what just happened verbally would almost be necessary. It could stand to be delivered in a better way, but the point is that being this expository is sometimes needed to properly communicate events within the realms of a medium like this. Episode 30 of the anime follows the same events. Fisher is attacked, he jumps to avoid it, and roughly 8 seconds are spent in absolute silence, simply focusing on Fisher and Kid. Then Fisher reiterates what had just happened. This is not only unneeded, the long pause in absolute silence borders on being insulting. It's presented as though it's giving the audience time to process what just happened and perhaps leave space for laughing while no characters are talking. But if the writers believe that we could process what happened, there's no need to explain it. If the writers did believe it needed to be explained, then the long pause serves only to pad out the runtime in an extremely awkward moment. While this is indeed accurate to what happened in the manga, there was no consideration for why this line was needed there, let alone why it was unneeded here. It was needed in the manga because it filled in the tiny but crucial details that occurred in between panels. Details that either aren't obvious enough on their own, or would take a closer look to see what's happening, so close that it might be inconvenient to the reader. But now this line is unneeded because it only serves to verbally tell us what the anime has already visually told us. When objects are in motion and the actions being taken are far more noticeable, the need for constant narration becomes redundant, and this is also true for Blade Works and Zero. While not all monologues fit this description, the ones that do suffer from being too accurate to their source, left in a medium that makes their very existence superfluous and patronizing. Granted, both shows do not suffer from this problem to the same degree, but comparing them in that regard is honestly something for a far more in-depth review than this. And yes, the irony of saying that has not been lost on me. Moving on. About a day passes and Castor summons his largest demon yet, calling back to it again. All of the masters and servants become aware of his activity by the river and leave to deal with him. Lancer insists that Salau stay behind for her own safety. Saber and Ryder arrive shortly before Lancer does as well. The three of them devise a plan. While Ryder and Saber attack the monster from the river, they'll create an opening to Castor and his grimoire. Then Lancer can use his spear to nullify his magic and take him out from the shore. The fight goes on until even Archer and Berserker are drawn to the battle, but no progress is made. Castor's monster has a limitless regenerative ability that won't allow them the opening Lancer needs. Ryder opts to use his Noble Phantasm to keep Castor busy, while Lancer and Saber think of another plan. During this time, Lancer learns of Saber's Noble Phantasm, one that is capable of destroying a fortress, but requires the use of her left hand, the same hand that Lancer had slashed. Saber insists that the mark left by Lancer was one of pride, and couldn't allow herself Lancer's pity so long as they were on opposite sides. After all, Lancer had no shortage of opportunities to remove Saber from the war, and now he's being asked to give up his advantage that he earned. But it doesn't matter in the face of what's at stake. In fact, that's all the more reason to sacrifice his advantage. If Lancer had allowed Saber to lose at any of the numerous opportunities before, she wouldn't be here now. Their best chance at victory is, ironically, only possible because he let her live. From Saber's perspective, it's understandable why she holds on to this ideal and fair fight. It's conceivable they could eventually defeat Castor on their own, given Lancer's spears perfectly counter both Castor's magic and healing factor. But he would never get to take advantage of that until the monster reached the shore, and by then it would be too late. She wants to hold on to that hope, no matter how small, but any victory at that point would be Pyrrhic. And so, he had made up his mind. Lancer had given up not only his sole advantage over Saber, but had also destroyed one of his spears in the process. It was now he who was disadvantaged. And yet, there was no other decision for him to make, such as the knight's path of chivalry. The battle is won, and Lancer retreats back to his new master. During this time, Kenneth visits the Overseer to collect on the command seal promised for Castor's defeat. He appeals to him, since Lancer was the one who allowed Saber to use her noble phantasm at all, that he should also receive a command seal. The Overseer complies, and Kenneth shoots him to prevent Saber's master from collecting on their command seal next. This isn't explained why the Overseer wouldn't even be somewhat protective, since there's nothing actually preventing someone from doing this. But while I'm going to focus on other parts of Lancer's arc, I wouldn't write this off as a small problem, since Risei's death affects more than just Lancer's own arc. Lancer returns to the rooftop where he left Solau, only to find her severed arm where the command seals used to be. Lancer later informs Kenneth of his fiance's kidnapping when they regroup at their hiding location. Despite his continuous attempts to reassure Kenneth that she is alive, Kenneth refuses to forgive Lancer even for a minute. He tries to find every reason to hate his servant, and for everything that's happened to him so far, it's perfectly in line for his character to be somewhat irrational, forced to resort to a weaker servant, being crippled both physically and magically, having his fiancée turned against him by his own servant's curse, and now she's been kidnapped because that same servant left her side. He then accuses Lancer of having purposefully seduced his wife and encouraged her to become his new master, drawing a connection with Diarmuid's legends and folklore. This doesn't quite make much sense, since it isn't in line with Diarmuid's legend. It was made well aware in his legend that the seduction was the result of the curse and not Diarmuid himself. It's unknown whether his legend in-universe is accurate to the events that actually occurred in the myth, but like I said, it wouldn't be out of place if Kenneth were irrational. Lancer denies that he had ever attempted to seduce Solau, but Kenneth continues to agitate him, even comparing his role as a servant to that of an animal on a leash. Lancer has wanted nothing more than to fight in the war in a noble and honorable fashion. He's tried to maintain his code and has so far succeeded, but after getting this far into the story, one can't help but ask, where has it gotten him? He has passed up so many opportunities to defeat Saber, crippling himself in the process, while prostrating himself to a master that treats him like a dog. Every time he's tried to act with the best intentions, it's ironically made his master hate him even more. Refusing to kill Saber with Berserker was only part of it. He had left Kenneth to serve Solau not out of betrayal, but so he could continue to fight for the Grail and use it to restore Kenneth's magic. Even leaving Solau to fight Castor, despite putting her in danger, was meant to keep her safe. But Kenneth doesn't see those intentions in Lancer's actions, only the mistakes. It shows just how much conflict there is between maintaining his honor and achieving redemption. He won't throw away that honor even as his relationship with his master crumbles, even as he repeats the same events that he led in life. Before he can say anything in response, Lancer notices that Saber and one of her allies approach the building. When Lancer greets them, he asks if they know what happened to Solau. Neither of them know, so he tells them to disregard. Though he seems against the idea of fighting. He assumes Saber must still be tired from the fight against Castor not hours ago, but she suggests that this is exactly the reason why it's the perfect opportunity. No other servant will have regained their strength in time to interrupt their battle. Saber is the only one who understands what Lancer wants from this war, without ever knowing what happened to him in his past. In this war, where he was treated as less than a knight, where his master berates him and denies him the redemption he wanted, ironically his only saving grace was with the enemy. Saber would grant him a knight's duel, a duel he came to this war specifically for, and still, she offered him so much more. That is, the respect of the most famous knight in all the world.
Saber, お前は左手を使わないつもりか。
今ここで左手を使えばきっと残機が私の剣を鈍らせる。全力であなたを倒すための。
Lancer had no desire for the Grail. He had no interest in his master beyond obligation. Nothing he was fighting for mattered to him, except for this. A chance to redeem himself. A chance to fight in honorable combat and prove his worth again. A chance that now she was returning to him, just as he gave her a fair chance at the Grail. Saber and Lancer could finally finish their battle that they started at the beginning. Win or lose, live or die, Lancer could achieve his dream and was proud to call himself a knight, same as the one who stood before him. Of course, that is the ideal outcome, But in this story, such things are fated to fail in tragedy. Saber's master, Kiritsugu Emiya, is the main protagonist of Fate Zero, and it's during Lancer's final moments that we see what kind of character he really is in such an open display. During Lancer and Saber's fight, Kiritsugu went behind the scenes to hunt down Kaneth. Having been the one behind his fiancée's kidnapping, he used her as leverage to demand Kaneth's withdrawal from the war. To sweeten the deal, he created a magical pact that would prevent him from harming either Kaneth or Solau, but if Kaneth refused, Kiritsugu would surely kill both of them before Lancer could notice. With only a single command seal left, and no other options available, Kaneth agreed to the pact and ordered Lancer to kill himself. Lancer's sole wish, to fight as a knight and regain his honor, has been broken, crushed by the allies of the very knight who he confided to, the mages that would value their own greedy ambitions over a man who wanted to reclaim his honor, and the master who made him truly realize that he was no more than an animal, much less a knight. As he dies, he swears a curse on them, the Grail, and the wish that it will grant, that it will bring disaster to whoever should claim it, foreshadowing events yet to come. Despite a large chunk of Zero's tropes emulating that of Greek tragedy, Lancer's story is one I somewhat contest might be closer to Shakespearean tragedy. The themes relating to Greek tragedies have more to do with inescapable and inevitable fate, which is certainly something prevalent in the anime, but Lancer's death was one that came about specifically because of the faith that he had placed in his code. Earlier, he had the opportunity to kill Kiritsugu after his battle with Castor, the same man who would eventually lead to his own defeat, but because he wouldn't betray Saber's trust, this led to his downfall. His death was certainly avoidable, or perhaps his faith in his code was exactly what made it unavoidable. Even in death, he would rather curse those around him than himself for wrongfully placing his trust in the enemy. He would never admit his honor as what led to his defeat. So then was this his fate? And if so, now that we know what fate awaits someone who values chivalry above victory, will Saber meet the same fate? Lancer's story is very well written, having maintained a consistent character even in the smallest and most meaningless of circumstances. His opening perfectly puts on display all three of his most prominent character traits, his chivalry, loyalty, and honor, all of which drive the conflict of his arc. These remain ever present throughout his story, and the origin of his motivations flow perfectly into his character that we see now. It gives us perspective into what awaits Saber by the end of this war. He died because he couldn't find it in himself to betray Saber's trust, to end the life of a man who would later be responsible for his defeat, to throw aside his chivalry for the sake of victory. Saber is the same. She placed her trust in Lancer and allowed him to rescue his master, believing he wouldn't kill her own in the process. She's displayed to be every bit as honorable and chivalrous as Lancer is, so we're now left questioning what will happen to her. It flows naturally alongside all of the other events happening simultaneously while still maintaining the themes independent of those events. This is more a complement of the story as a whole rather than any one individual arc, but it's only because each arc is written so seamlessly alongside so many others that it deserves such praise at all. Lancer's journey is no exception, and all of it complements Zero's tone almost perfectly. It's ironic, for a servant who's arguably the weakest out of the seven, his arc is quite possibly one of the strongest. So what about Stay Night's Lancer? How does he compare? Well, the short version is, he doesn't. Lancer appears in the prelude episode of Season 1 as well as the episode following. He then never appears again until episode 16. Then he dies 3 episodes later. But what little screen time he has is hardly the real issue. Lancer is introduced during the first battle of the anime, about a day after Archer is summoned. Both before and after his fight, we see that he isn't keen on killing those that don't stand a chance against him. He laments that he has to kill Rin and later that he had to kill Shiro for witnessing the fight, but he won't disobey an order from his master. Skip to episode 16, we learn slightly more about him. He's very loyal to the master he's sworn to, almost identically to Zero's Lancer.
君は隣の芝生は青いということわざを知っているか?
何言ってやがる。なもん俺が知ってるわけねえだろうが!
In this scene, Lancer admits that he wouldn't join another master even if they were the better pick. Loyalty is a valuable trait to him, and it also allows us better understanding of Archer's character as well. When compared to someone who takes pride in his loyalty, we can see that Archer doesn't care as much as he does about winning. but this is all just meant to distract from an overarching problem. Lancer is a plot device, through and through. Almost every scene he's in uses him to force the plot in an unnatural direction. Take his first appearance, for example. We're told that he's been ordered by his master to observe and survey the other servants and their masters. Why then did he engage Rin if he were simply ordered to watch? He reveals himself when she's going to erase the sigil around the school, disappointed that she's going to do so, but why would that upset him? The sigil itself is a noble phantasm controlled by Ryder. He can't use it for anything. It'd be advantageous if she did erase it. This is because we need an excuse to move the events forward that will allow our protagonist to join the war. After episode 1, there's never another moment that follows up on these events, never a time when Lancer is sent to conclude his unfinished business with Shiro, nor does the information gathered hold any value as far as we're told. He never makes another attempt on Shiro's life. Being an inexperienced target that constantly puts himself out in the open, it would be easy for him to remove one more opponent from the war. Even if such attempts wouldn't end successfully, Lancer's absence is far too noticeable for it to be written off. But perhaps the biggest display of plot convenience is around the time of his second encounter with Archer. Prior to the fight, Rin and Shiro were looking for another servant to ask for assistance in their fight against Castor. Lancer offers to distract Archer while they finish the rest. He's shown to be slightly fond of Rin, and since he needs to eliminate Castor after all the trouble she's caused, he decides to help them in their fight. Although, later he reveals the reason he's been helping them is to keep Rin safe for the plans that his master has for her. With this new context, it makes no sense why he'd help them fight Castor when that could put her in greater danger. Kidnapping her while they're vulnerable and without servants would be much easier, and if they rescue Saber, it will make it much harder to kidnap Rin after all is said and done. But if he did that, our story would be over. Nothing else about Lancer's presence has any narrative significance, and there are other important factors that are ignored to make this alliance happen. For example, Lancer has no real reason to ally himself with Rin and Shiro. Even if his fondness to Rin wasn't anything more than a convenient excuse to motivate his actions, he already has powerful allies that can fight Castor. The story seems to forget that Lancer's master is Kirei Kotomine, who is allied with the most powerful servant in the war. Lancer not only doesn't consider this, but he doesn't seem to be aware that such a powerful player is on his side. A justification for this would be that Gilgamesh was needed elsewhere and retaking the church wasn't a priority. But if that was the case, why send Lancer to take it back at all if it isn't that important? What advantage is even gained by taking it back if the Grail isn't even there? And what was so much more important that Gilgamesh was doing at the time? What was more important that it warranted risking the life of the Grail's vessel? But there's more. As mentioned, Lancer and Archer battle it out while Rin and Shiro enter the church to confront Castor. Archer is only trying to bide his time until Castor becomes too busy to monitor him. Once her focus is off, Archer chooses to take advantage of the moment and kill Castor. Lancer, having realized this was his plan all along, calls off the fight and leaves. This is strangely out of character because his orders were to keep Rin safe, but he doesn't feel the need to assure her safety or even Castor's defeat. He doesn't consider that they might need his help, like if Castor decided to use Saber against them, or if Archer is lying to him and is actually going to back up Castor. The reason why this happens is because the story can't have him interfering in Archer's fight with Shiro after Castor dies. This is made more confusing when it's shown in the next episode that he didn't even leave the premises, despite dematerializing as though he had. It shows that he has a motive to stay, but that motive doesn't extend to helping Rin and Shiro any further. After killing Castor, Archer leaves his fight unfinished and kidnaps Rin to use her as leverage against Shiro for their next encounter. This gives Lancer reason to help yet again. The problem is that he already knows that Archer had kidnapped Rin. He stayed just outside the church so he would have seen Archer leaving the scene with Rin unconscious. He also didn't question or even try to stop him upon leaving. The reason he didn't do this is because, again, the story can't have Lancer interfering with Archer's battle with Shiro. This is what I mean when I say that Lancer's purpose is that of a plot device. He doesn't just move the plot forward, but he forces it to despite all contrary, creating plot holes, plot conveniences, and contrivances in the process. He has a character only in the most superficial sense. Though he has personality traits, there's barely anything of value that has relevance to the plot. But he's still necessary to moving the plot in the direction it needs to, which makes his presence extremely unnatural. Even though there's technically more to talk about, I don't think anything else needs to be said about Lancer. He's barely on screen long enough to discern any character from any remaining consistency, what little there is. His most notable contributions are his involvement with Shiro's induction, and further developing Archer's character during their second duel. Virtually everything else beyond this is borderline unnecessary. and his final moments on screen are in what is perhaps one of the most contrived scenes in the entire show. Like I said, there's nothing to compare between these two, but that's not to say that there couldn't be. During the time it's taken me to write the script, I've actually learned Castor and Lancer have something in common. Lancer also had a master before his current one. I won't go into it too deeply because it's not mentioned in Bladeworks. Also, I haven't really read into it that much either, but in any case, delving into something like this not only could have added more depth to Lancer's character, but it also could expand on his relationship with his current master and the dichotomy that they shared. And understanding their relationship would have been important to understanding Lancer's death. So, what was that relationship exactly? Let's move focus from the servants and turn to one of the most notable masters in both Stay Night and Zero, Kirei Kotomine.